Hey, good morning. Good morning online. Glad you're here as well. Heather was talking about the children's ministry here and the investments that we have made. And both Gabby, who was dancing, and Olivia, who were singing, have been around the whole time I've been around for 20 years. They were this big then. And this church invested in them back then, and they have this rich faith in Jesus that they demonstrate and share their gifts with the church. And so it really is truly an investment. Gabby, thank you. Liv, you're here somewhere too. Liv, thanks. Thanks for doing that. I appreciate your gifts. So we're in this series called Close Enough to Change Everything. And I want to thank you for those of you who have sent emails or texts or talked to me in the lobby or other places and told me how much you appreciate what we've been talking about. And in the first week, we talked about proximity to pain is personal and how proximity is an opportunity. And I asked the question, are you willing to move closer, move past what would be issues toward life-changing compassion and empathy? That we would not see the issue, but we would see the person. That when we move close, we become part of a healing that can take place in people's lives. We become part of the story and part of the restoration, and then we get to change our hearts as well as changing the world around us. And then last week, pain is easy to miss when we're in a crowd, and talked about how pain often is silent and it doesn't shout. And to love like Jesus, we have to resist the rush and slow down enough to see and make space to hear God's promptings. And so I hope you like this one too, because I think today I'm going to move a little bit from preaching to meddling. And so you can send the emails. Today we're going to talk about that you can't love like Jesus from a distance. That you can't love like Jesus from a distance. That we need to step into people's stories because grace meets people where they are, and we can't do that from a distance. And so today's scripture is from the Gospel of Luke. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all wrote the stories of Jesus, and they each told them from their own unique perspectives and to a unique audience. And so they have some difference, but they also have a lot of similarities in their stories. And so in Luke's Gospel, he shares a story in chapter 19 that we're going to talk about, but we have to look at Luke chapter 18 before we do that. See, because there's three words that are important when reading the Bible. Context is king. Context is king. You need to know what's happening, who's happening, and why it's happening. And so we have to look at Luke chapter 18 before we can read Luke chapter 19. And so I'm going to tell you the quick story. It's a story about a man who engages Jesus in a conversation. And they end up talking about morality, and they end up talking about life, and they end up talking about what is good. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke all share this story, and together they describe him as a rich young ruler. This is what happens in Luke chapter 18. He's a guy who has resources and wealth, and he can take his life in any direction he chooses. He has money. One of the gospel writers tells us that he's rich. We find out that he has status because another gospel writer tells us that he's a ruler. And we also find out that he must have health because he's young. He can do things that some of us can't do any longer. We only wish we could, right? And all of those things, being rich and young and a ruler, to have money and status and health, all of those provide him with freedom and opportunity that he can do anything with his life. And in addition to having all of that wealth, as the story is told, as he's in conversation with Jesus, we discover that this guy has moral excellence. He tells Jesus that he has never lied, cheated, stolen, coveted, killed, or dishonored his parents. He has reached status and wealth and health and opportunity without ever cheating or lying or stealing or coveting or killing or dishonoring his parents. He seems like the perfect guy to be a disciple. He has the resume to be a disciple. It's outstanding. And then Jesus challenges him with two things. He says, give away all your wealth and follow me. Give it all away and follow me. And the story ends that the man walks away sad. He could have been a disciple, but we don't even know his name. He could have been a first century influencer with all his talent. He could have even been a gospel writer. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and this young man. He would have been a top recruit. He would have been the number 3 pick. You know what I mean? He would have been that guy. And the disciples say, if he can't get in, who in the world can be saved? He walks away sad, and they say, if he doesn't get in, who can do this, Jesus? He's never lied. He's never cheated. He never stole anything. He never coveted. He never killed. He didn't dishonor his parents. Look at all the way God's blessed him, too. He's got money and status and freedom and health. And Jesus lets him walk away. This guy is a top recruit. He should be one of the disciples. And then they say, if he can't join us, if he doesn't pass the bar, Jesus, how can anyone? How can anyone? And Jesus responds in Luke chapter 18, what is impossible for people is possible with God. All right, that's the Luke 18 context. Now we get Luke chapter 19. Now in Luke chapter 19, we're going to meet another guy who is also wealthy. And when we look at the gospel writings, we have to wonder, is this chronological? It's possible that the stories in chapter 18 happened and then chapter 19 happened right after that, and this was a story that unfolded in that way. It's also possible that Luke, when he was writing, is sending a message and saying, here are things that I'm setting you up for in chapter 18 because they're going to be revealed in chapter 19. Either way, what happens in chapter 18 is important to what happens in chapter 19. And I believe it's to answer the question, is it possible? And the answer is, with God, it is very possible. So let's read chapter 19. Part of it's going to be up on the screen. We're just going to read the first few verses. So Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. And there was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region. Being chief means that he had tax collectors that worked for him. Lots of tax collectors, they all stole from people for Rome, and then they also gave a cut to Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus was a very wealthy man. He had become very rich, Luke says. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd, all right? Remember Sunday school, little Zacchaeus? All right, this is the guy, all right? So it says he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. So Zacchaeus couldn't see. He's short. And the crowd likely would have made sure he didn't see. You ever been to a parade? Ever been the 5th guy in line in the parade and you're doing this? All right. Well, that's Zacchaeus. I imagine nobody was making a space for him. Nobody wanted to be near him. I am sure that the crowd made it hard for Zacchaeus to see Jesus passing by. He would have been one of the most, if not the most, unpopular person in Israel. He chose to be a traitor and a collaborator with the Roman government. And so no one would have given him space. It was even courageous for him to mingle with the crowd at all. I imagine that during the parade, as he was trying to find a way to see Jesus, that there were those who were throwing elbows his way, or maybe kicking him or in the shins, or doing something just to get opportunity to wound the guy who was stealing from the Jewish people by overtaxing, and he was living off of their sacrifice. Zacchaeus would have been black and blue spending time in a crowd like that. So Luke tells us that he ran ahead and he climbed a tree. How childish, right? Here's this grown man in a tree. You don't want to see me climbing a tree. It's not a pretty picture, all right? It's not comfortable. I'm not a kid anymore. It's a childish thing to do. And again, I wonder if Luke chapter 18 and chapter 19 aren't connected. Because in Luke chapter 18, Jesus also says that to receive the kingdom of God, you have to become like a child. And in chapter 19, we find Zacchaeus doing this childish thing of climbing into a tree to see Jesus pass by. So the story goes on. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus, remember he's in a tree, and he called him by name. Zacchaeus, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. They grumbled, "He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner." I think this is a story about how we measure people. That we all have a list of who is in and who is out. And I think it's a story about assumptions and prejudice. That the rich young ruler in Luke chapter 18, it was assumed he was in because he looked and acted like us. Like us. He was Jewish like us. That he kept the commandments like us. That he did all the things that made him like us. That he would have been good in our group. We would have felt comfortable around him in our group. He would have looked and sounded just like us. And Zacchaeus, well, he's out. He's not like us. He chose another way. He's a tax collector. He's hated. He's excluded from community. He chose Rome over us. It seems obvious, right? The rich young ruler, he's morally perfect. He's a good guy, and Zacchaeus is a cheater and a traitor. The rich young ruler, he acted and looked like the disciples, while Zacchaeus, well, we know his story. Rich young ruler, like us. Zacchaeus, not like us. I think this is a story about how we measure people. I think it's a story about who we believe is in and who we believe is out. It's a story about assumptions and prejudice. Now, for the last couple of weeks, this is the third week in the series and it's wrapping up today, I've been talking about life at the margins. That there are people who are marginalized and pushed to the side. They're cast out. They're sometimes even seen as just part of the fabric of my environment. But here's the thing, being marginalized doesn't always look like poverty. And it doesn't always look like pain. Sometimes it wears a smile. And sometimes it holds a steady job, and sometimes it even blends into the crowd. That it might be the coworker who seems confident but keeps others at a distance. Sometimes it's the quiet teenager who rarely speaks up. Or the single parent carrying more than you can imagine. Or the person whose politics you struggle to understand. Or the LGBTQ plus neighbor who assumes Christians will avoid them. Or the immigrant still learning the language and rhythm of a new culture. And sometimes, if we're being most honest, we're the ones who push people to the margins or create boundaries because people look or think or act differently from us. And that race and culture and appearance or background can shape our prejudices in ways that we may not always recognize. And when we're living in the center and we're only looking towards the margins from a distance, we make assumptions. We carry unconscious bias, and we bring prejudice. So Jesus says, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your house today. Let's just pause there just for a second. Just a little levity, because I know I just got pretty heavy there. Jesus invited himself to somebody's house. Did you see that? Like, have you ever done that? Have you ever seen someone you haven't seen in a while and you go, hey, I need to be a guest at your house today? Jesus invites himself to the guy's house. And as far as we can tell, he just met him. But somehow Jesus knew his name. I don't think he used God powers there. I think Zacchaeus was pretty infamous in Jericho. I think his name probably went ahead, and he was known as the small guy in town. And Jesus knew him. And Jesus said, I must be a guest in your house today. That Jesus moved toward Zacchaeus, someone who was rejected, someone who was marginalized by his community, someone who had, it seems, everything, but he didn't have people in his life. And I know it seems odd for Jesus to invite himself to dinner, but that's because we're putting our 21st century thought into that. I believe there's a reason he shouted that over the crowd. I believe there's a reason he shouted, Zacchaeus, I must come to your house today for dinner. And the reason comes from my favorite author, Brennan Manning. I've read everything Brennan Manning's ever written. He says this, sharing a meal with someone in the first century guarantees peace, trust, fraternity, and forgiveness. The shared table symbolizes a shared life. An Orthodox Jew, like Jesus, saying, I would like to have dinner with you, implies, I would like to enter into friendship with you. Jesus shouts over the crowd to this man who is an enemy, an outcast, someone without community. He shouts over the crowd, I want to be your friend. I want to come beside you and talk with you and get to know you and you to get to know me. See, I think dinner with Zacchaeus, he was teaching the disciples and teaching us as his disciples as well, that proximity can transform lives and bring justice and reconciliation. That when we choose to move from the center to the margin and be close to someone who's been pushed aside, we bring justice and reconciliation. Brian Stevenson, who's the author of Just Mercy, says this. He says, when we get close to those affected by injustice, we gain a deeper understanding. He says, and only then can we truly advocate for change. He says, true change begins with presence. That sounds like something moving closer, doesn't it? And in his work for justice, he emphasizes a simple but powerful truth that's up on the screen. We cannot create justice from a distance. We have to get proximate. Yeah, he used the word proximate. That was cool. So as I've challenged us each week, being a disciple of Jesus means more than belief. It means more than showing up to church. I mean, that's great. It's important. It's why we do this. But it's more than belief. It means walking in his footsteps, like we've talked about each week. It means that we're living the way he lived. That if Jesus does something, that means we can do that thing too. It's why, I think I said it in the first week, it's the reason when Jesus was walking on the water, in that story where Jesus walks on the water, and then Peter says, Lord, if it's you, call me out there too. Not because Peter really thought he could walk on the water, because if my rabbi can do it, I can do it too. Because that was his desire. The student is to become like the rabbi. The student is to become like his teacher. And so if Jesus can do it, Peter said, then I can do it too. So if Jesus can do something, we can do it too. If Jesus does something, we should do it too. So Jesus entered Zacchaeus' life personally and intentionally. He crossed social boundaries to connect with someone who had been rejected. And so my thought as I've been wrestling with this message is, if your faith never causes people to whisper, or never causes people to wonder why you're spending time with those people, you might be watching from a distance when Jesus invites you to walk in his steps. See, this is the way of Jesus. Not separation, but incarnation. It's the driving force for why we do something like Third Tuesday. Because something happens around dinner. Christine Caine said, supper changes more lives than sermons. It hurt a little bit. But supper changes more lives than sermons. See, we can't love like Jesus from far away. We have to move closer. We have to push past boundaries. See, we're here to get close enough to change everything. And we can change everything because love and grace and transformation can happen, but it only happens face to face. You see, Jesus' presence in Zacchaeus' life flipped the script on Zacchaeus' life. Zacchaeus went living in a tree to see someone to in relationship with Jesus around a dinner table. And even though Zacchaeus was a cheater and a turncoat, Jesus loved him. That the crowd saw Zacchaeus' past while Jesus saw Zacchaeus' future. That Jesus didn't wait for Zacchaeus to clean up his life first. He called him by name. He made an invitation and he crossed every boundary. That Jesus' act of proximity towards Zacchaeus, stepping into his house and sharing a meal, it was deeply transformative. And his life was moved by this kind of grace that was close and next to him. That Zacchaeus then chooses to make things right. He chooses to give generously to the poor and restoring what he'd taken unjustly. And you read the rest of that story. I'm not going to read it to you. But do you see what Luke did here? Do you see what Jesus did here? That the story ends with Zacchaeus giving away his wealth. And it's not about giving away the wealth. That's not the moral of the story. He did what the disciples thought was impossible to do. He did what the rich young ruler, who will live in infamy as the anonymous rich young ruler, couldn't do. But Zacchaeus didn't change because of shame. He changed because of grace. He changed because grace met him at a dinner table. Grace called his name and said, I must be in friendship with you. Grace gets personal when it gets close. The band's going to come up because I'm supposed to be done. So question for you to consider. They're going to sing, and I don't want you to stand up. I want you just to sit for a moment. And I have a question for you to consider, and then the band will probably tell you to sing, and then you can sing. So don't sing until they tell you to sing. But who are you consciously or unconsciously keeping at a distance because of labels or reputations or assumptions? And have the courage to ask God to reveal that to you. Who do you overlook or judge or ignore? Is there someone that God's putting on your heart right now? And God's saying you need to bring grace and connection and care to that person this week. See, because we're not here to watch from a distance. We're called to move in the same steps as Jesus. So I pray you reflect on that as the band